When the sky first changed that morning, most people thought it was just another strange weather event. Something to post online for a few hours, maybe talk about at work, and then forget. But within minutes, every screen on Earth phones, televisions, billboards, even the big displays in public squares switched to the same emergency alert. It didn't matter which country a person lived in or what language they spoke. The message appeared everywhere at the same time. People stepped outside, confused and unsettled. Some raised their phones to record what they saw. High above the atmosphere, something huge was blocking the sunlight. At first, it looked like a cluster of clouds, but clouds didn't move in perfect formation. And they definitely didn't shine with a metallic glow. Slowly, the realization spread. These were ships, not one, not two, but an entire fleet, massive structures shaped like floating cities, arranged in long lines that stretched across the sky like a second horizon. They were silent, almost too silent, as if sound itself refused to go near them. There was no attack, no flashing lights, no sudden explosions, just a strange, heavy stillness that made people freeze where they stood. Around the world, governments scrambled. Air Force jets were ordered into the sky, but they stopped at a distance, keeping far from the unknown vessels. Scientists rushed into observatories. Diplomatic leaders tried to contact each other. No one really knew what was happening or why these ships had come. Then, without any warning, every ship lit up with a soft white glow. A single message appeared again, this time not written, but spoken. The voice was calm, emotionless, and translated itself instantly into every language. We are delivering 6 million displaced civilians to the planet Earth. This is your sanction. The word sanction echoed across the world. People stared at one another, confused. Civilians? What civilians? And what sanction? Countries had no idea what the message meant. Earth had never taken part in any interstellar conflict, or at least none that ordinary people knew about. But before anyone could react, the voice continued. You will accept them. You will house them. You will feed them. Their burden is now yours. The message ended as suddenly as it began. For a long moment, nothing else happened. The sky remained still. People waited for something, an explanation, a conversation, a threat, but there was only silence. It felt as if the entire planet was holding its breath. And the ships moved. Long panels opened underneath the vessels, revealing huge landing crafts, thousands of them. One by one, they descended toward Earth's surface like falling stars, moving with a controlled, steady speed. Their patterns were too organized to be chaotic, yet too many to count. On the ground, emergency sirens rang everywhere. People stayed inside their homes. Some hid in basements. Others gathered on rooftops to watch. News channels switched to nonstop coverage, showing blurry footage of the crafts landing in remote deserts, open fields, abandoned industrial zones, and safe landing corridors marked by governments long ago for unlikely global emergencies. No one had truly expected such sites would ever be used. Yet here they were. The crafts were not military-looking. They were large, rounded, and strangely quiet, built from some kind of silver-blue material that looked smooth like glass, but strong like metal. They touched the ground gently, releasing soft clouds of white mist that drifted harmlessly over the dirt. For a moment, the doors of the crafts remained closed. People waited, and then the first door opened. Out stepped a small group then, trembling, carrying nothing. Their clothes looked worn, faded, and patched together. They didn't move like soldiers. They didn't look like threats. They looked tired, scared, and lost. Observers on site reported seeing families' parents carrying children, elders being supported by younger ones, and others limping as if they had traveled too far for too long. They blinked at the sunlight as though it hurt their eyes. Some gazed at the sky with fear, expecting the ships above to attack them. But the ships stayed still. The world didn't know what to do. Military teams surrounded the areas, but they held their distance. Medical teams, unsure of safety, hesitated. But then one doctor from a nearby field hospital stepped forward, slowly approaching the refugees with empty hands. She didn't know their language. She didn't know if they were dangerous or if they carried unknown illnesses. She only knew that they needed help. She offered a bottle of water. The first refugee who accepted it looked at her with wide, cautious eyes. He lifted the bottle with shaking hands and drank only a small sip, as if unsure whether he was allowed more. The doctor nodded gently, encouraging him. And then, like a wave, more refugees stepped forward, drawn by the simple kindness. Cameras captured the moment and broadcast it globally. People watching from their homes felt something shift. These weren't invaders. They were victims, exhausted, frightened, and abandoned. But questions remained. Why would a powerful alien coalition force Earth to take them? What punishment were they talking about? And why were these people dumped here instead of being helped by their own side? Governments issued urgent statements. Some officials demanded answers from the ships above. Others debated whether Earth should refuse. But refusing wasn't possible. The ships were too powerful. Still, no threats had been made. No aggression. Only this strange, cold order. Around the world, online discussions exploded. Some people panicked, fearing the newcomers would bring conflict, disease, or chaos. Others felt sympathy, pointing out the obvious signs of hardship. The hollow cheeks, the slow movements, the way many refugees clung to one another, like they had been separated too many times already. As more landing crafts opened, the true scale of the situation became clear. 6 million was not just a number. It was an ocean of people, too many to ignore, too many to hide, too many to send away. The world had changed in a single morning. In one small village near a landing zone. Residents watched from a distance as hundreds of refugees stepped onto the soil. They looked thin, confused, and overwhelmed. The villagers didn't have any instructions from officials yet. They didn't know what rules to follow. But they saw shivering children, tired elders, and families huddling together with nothing to protect them from the cold. So the villagers did something simple. They brought blankets. A few walked up slowly, offering the blankets without saying anything. The refugees didn't understand the words, but they understood the gesture. Some hesitated. Others accepted the blankets with gratitude that needed no translation. This small act spread rapidly online. It touched hearts, softened fear, and made people rethink the situation. If simple villagers could show kindness without panic, then maybe others could, too. Meanwhile, on the news, experts tried to explain what might have happened. One theory suggested that Earth had unknowingly interfered in some distant political issue. Another theory claimed that the alien coalition simply needed a place to send these refugees and saw Earth as weak enough to be forced into it. Some believed the coalition wanted to embarrass humanity, make Earth look unprepared, overwhelmed and incapable, but the truth was still unknown. Inside the landing zones, the refugees were slowly guided into holding areas. Medical teams began doing basic checks: body temperature, hydration levels, visible injuries. Many refugees flinched at the touch of medical tools, as though expecting harm. Some carried scars that told of long journeys and hard living, but none of it was shown in a graphic or disturbing way, just quiet signs of suffering that they tried to hide. A few tried to speak, using unfamiliar sounds and gestures. Scientists watching from behind safety screens started recording the patterns, trying to identify their language. Linguists gathered in labs, comparing symbols written on scraps of cloth some refugees carried. Communication was difficult, But the intention was clear. These people didn't want to fight. They wanted safety. By evening, the ships in the sky finally began to move. Slowly, silently, they pulled away from Earth, drifting back into the clouds like fading ghosts. No final message. No hints about coming back. They left humanity with 6 million strangers, and no guidance. People watched as the sky slowly cleared. The planet felt different, heavier, quieter, more uncertain. Leaders around the world started assembling emergency plans. But despite the confusion and fear, something else was rising to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, humanity wouldn't respond with cruelty. Hope that kindness could be stronger than fear. People didn't know it yet, but this day would mark the beginning of a story far bigger than Earth, far bigger than any one nation. A story where humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or power, but the simple choice to care for those who had nowhere else to go. And this was only the beginning. The first night after the arrival was one of the most confusing nights in human history. Every country stayed awake. Every news channel kept repeating the same footage. People scrolled endlessly through social media, reading posts from strangers who were just as confused and worried as they were. The world felt like one big room where nobody knew what to say, but everyone kept talking anyway. Governments held emergency meetings in every major capital. Some leaders spoke calmly. Others looked tense and nervous, clearly unsure of what to do. 6 million refugees wasn't just a number. It was a responsibility that no nation had prepared for. And the fact that they were not human made everything even more complicated. In one country, officials gathered around a long table covered with papers and digital screens. Advisors kept reading reports sent from landing zones. Medical updates, security updates, food supply estimates. Everything was happening at once. One official leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes, saying softly, "We have to decide something before sunrise." But deciding wasn't easy. Half of the advisors were worried about resources. They spoke about food shortages, shelter limitations, and the cost of caring for so many newcomers. They argued that Earth should demand the alien coalition take them back. Others at the table shook their heads, reminding them that the coalition clearly didn't care. The ships had dropped the refugees and left. Asking them to return was useless. A quiet voice finally broke through the noise. It belonged to one of the younger advisors who had been listening more than speaking. She said, "They didn't come here to hurt us. They came because they had nowhere else to go." We all saw how scared they are. Silence followed her words. Not because people disagreed, but because nobody had a good answer. Helping 6 million strangers would require more than kindness. It would require organization, cooperation, and trust on a level Earth had never seen before. Across the ocean in another country, a similar debate was happening. Their leader kept replaying videos sent by soldiers at the landing zones. Every video showed the same thing: tired refugees sitting on the ground, trying to understand a world they had never seen before. In one clip, a child from the refugee group held out a small object, some kind of broken toy, to a human medic. The medic didn't know what it was supposed to be, but the child's gesture was clear. It was a sign of trust, a tiny offering of peace. Moments like that made the leader's decision even harder. The heart said one thing. The mind said another. Meanwhile, ordinary people around the world were having their own debates. Families sat in living rooms, talking late into the night. Some were afraid. They worried about Earth's safety or the planet's limited resources. Others argued that fear couldn't be the only response. They spoke about humanity's responsibility to protect those in need. Online, millions of comments appeared. Some were supportive, others were doubtful. But one thing was certain: the whole planet was talking. And with every conversation, The situation felt more real. At a small cafe in a quiet town, a group of friends gathered after work. They weren't scientists or leaders, just regular people trying to understand something bigger than anything they'd ever imagined. They talked about the refugees' thin faces, their tired eyes, the way they clung to one another. One of them said, "Did you see the video where that little kid smiled at the doctor?" My heart just dropped. Another nodded slowly. "Yeah, they don't look dangerous." For the first time, the conversation in the cafe wasn't about sports or work or the weather. It was about responsibility, compassion, and fear, all mixed together. In schools, teachers struggled to explain the situation to children. Some students were curious, asking innocent questions that adults didn't know how to answer. Why did they send them here? Are they going to stay forever? Do they have families? Teachers did their best, saying things like, "We're still learning, and everyone is trying to help." In hospitals, medical teams worked nonstop, reviewing data and preparing for possible health risks. They didn't want to panic anyone, but they had to be careful. Still, every report they received from the landing zones said the same thing. The refugees weren't showing any signs of aggression or illness. Their main problems were exhaustion, hunger, dehydration, and stress. Problems humans understood very well. While the world discussed and argued, something unexpected started happening in the background. People began sending donations, not because governments asked them to, but because they wanted to help. Blankets, clothes, packaged food, shoes, tents, and other essentials. Volunteers drove across cities to drop off supplies at collection points. In one town near a landing site, volunteers gathered in a large sports hall that was quickly turned into a temporary storage center. Boxes came in nonstop. Older volunteers sorted clothes by size. Younger volunteers created small kits with toothbrushes, soap, and water bottles. Nobody asked for rewards. Nobody demanded recognition. They just worked, understanding that the refugees had nothing. Meanwhile, the refugees in the landing zone sat quietly, trying not to draw attention. They didn't push or shout. They stayed in small groups, comforting each other in their own language. Some sat with their heads bowed, too tired to move. Others stared at the sky, still shaken by their long journey. They didn't know how Earth would treat them. They only knew that their old homes were gone, and their future was uncertain. In one landing zone, a human translator who specialized in analyzing unknown languages tried communicating with a small group of refugees. The conversation was slow and careful. The refugees were nervous, but they tried answering simple gestures and pictures. Over time, the translator understood a little. They weren't soldiers. They weren't criminals. They weren't being sent here because of anything they did wrong. They were simply unwanted. When this small conclusion reached government leaders, the global debate changed again. It became clear that these refugees had not been sent to punish Earth, but to punish them. They were used as a burden the coalition didn't want to carry anymore. Still, not everyone agreed on how to respond. Some leaders raised concerns about long-term costs. "We can't take them all," one official said during a broadcast. "We barely manage our own challenges." Another leader argued, "If we accept them, what message are we sending? That Earth can be pushed around?" But voices of compassion also grew louder. A spokesperson from one humanitarian group said on live TV, "These people are not tools or weapons. They're living beings. We can't treat them like trash just because someone else did." The world was split. But even in this division, something interesting started happening. People began listening to each other. They argued, but they also shared stories, fears, and hopes. The crisis made humanity talk like one global community. Even if disagreements were strong. In a quiet apartment on the other side of the planet, a man watched the news alone. He wasn't rich or influential. He lived a simple life. But as he watched videos of the refugees walking out of the landing crafts, he felt something shift inside him. He thought about times in his own life when he needed help, how strangers had shown kindness when they didn't have to. He whispered to himself, "They deserve a chance. Everyone does." At the same time, scientists from different countries joined forces online. They created shared folders, exchanged recordings of the refugees' language, compared data, and built a system to slowly translate basic words. Their cooperation wasn't ordered by anyone. It happened naturally, driven by curiosity and empathy. That night, one scientist discovered a repeating sound pattern in the refugees' speech. It wasn't a full breakthrough, but it was a step toward understanding. He shared the finding with others, and soon teams across the world began building upon it. The more they studied, the more they realized the refugees were trying to communicate peacefully. By morning, the debate on Earth had grown quieter, not because people stopped caring, but because the first shock had softened. Fear was still there, but so was empathy. Leaders continued to argue, but the world had changed overnight. People were no longer asking, "Should we help?" They were asking, "How can we help without creating chaos?" The world didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear: the refugees weren't enemies. They were people who had suffered more than anyone could imagine. And humanity had a choice to make, a choice that would shape the future, a choice that would show the galaxy whether Earth answered cruelty with cruelty or with kindness that no one expected. The third day after the refugees arrived felt very different from the first two. The panic had softened, the shock had faded a little, and the world finally began to breathe again. People were still confused, of course. Nobody knew exactly what the future would look like. But something else had started to grow in the air, something warmer, something that made the fear feel smaller. It began with small things. In one country, a group of volunteers set up a long row of tables outside a community center near a landing zone. They laid out water, bread, fruit, blankets, and warm drinks. No one had told them to do it. They just couldn't stop thinking about the images they'd seen on the news: tired figures sitting on cold ground, families holding on to one another, children with weary eyes. The volunteers waited quietly for the first group of refugees to approach. When they finally arrived, it was clear how nervous they were. They moved slowly, unsure if the food was really meant for them. One of the volunteers gently held up a cup of warm tea and smiled in the most honest way she could. The refugees didn't know her language, but they understood the gesture. The first few stepped forward hesitantly, then more followed. A moment that simple changed everything. That short clip: one volunteer smiling, one refugee accepting a cup spread across the internet within hours. People around the world watched it and felt something shift in their hearts. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It wasn't political. It was just kindness, shown in the most human way possible. That same day, a group of teachers in another country gathered inside a school gym, trying to figure out how to help the refugee children. They didn't speak the same language, didn't understand the same gestures, didn't know anything about one another. But teachers everywhere share the same instinct: to protect children, no matter who they are. So the teachers created simple picture cards with drawings of food, water, sleep, play, bathroom signs, and friendly greetings. They sat in a circle on the gym floor with the children, showing one card at a time. Slowly, carefully, the children began to respond. They pointed to drawings they understood. They mimicked the simple hand movements the teachers used. And little by little, smiles started appearing. One of the teachers later said, "Children don't carry the fear adults carry. They're just looking for safety and warmth. If we give that, they open their hearts immediately." The world watched as videos of these classroom moments spread. A little boy laughing softly when he recognized a picture of water. A girl showing a teacher a small cloth toy she had hidden in her pocket. Another child tracing shapes on the floor to explain something from her home. None of this solved the global crisis, but it changed how people felt inside. Far from the centers of attention, in a small town near a quiet forest, a man and his neighbors were building temporary shelters out of wood and metal sheets. Their town wasn't rich, and the shelters weren't fancy, but they had roofs, beds, and warm lighting. When a group of refugees arrived, exhausted and unsure, the townspeople stayed close enough to guide them, but far enough not to overwhelm them. One of the locals spoke softly, pointing to the shelter and then to the refugees. He gently tapped his chest once, then pointed to the shelter again, trying to say, "It's for you." After a moment of hesitation, the refugees walked inside, looking relieved that the place was dry, clean, and warm. Moments like this multiplied everywhere. They weren't loud or dramatic, but they mattered. In the bigger cities, food trucks lined up near landing zones, handing out simple meals: rice, bread, soup, fruits. Most of the refugees were so hungry they ate slowly at first, as if their bodies didn't trust the food would last. But seeing them finally get warm meals made people feel something deep and human. Many volunteers said later that the refugees ate with a kind of silent gratitude, almost as if they were afraid speaking might make the moment disappear. Across the world, communication teams, scientists, linguists, psychologists began working nonstop to understand the refugees' language. It wasn't easy. The sounds were unfamiliar, the tone patterns were different, and the writing symbols they found on cloth pieces didn't match anything from Earth. But the scientists didn't give up. Each discovery felt like a step toward connection. Late one night, a breakthrough happened. A team noticed that the refugees repeated certain sounds when pointing to people, food, or objects. Over time, they realized those sounds were basic words: help, safe, cold, family. When the scientists shared their findings with field teams, volunteers carefully tested the words with small groups of refugees. To everyone's surprise, the refugees' eyes lit up when they heard the familiar sounds. They nodded, repeated the words, and even corrected the pronunciation gently. It wasn't full communication, but it was a bridge. Meanwhile, the global debate continued. Governments still argued. Some leaders were worried about long-term sustainability. Others insisted that humanity needed to show compassion, even if it was difficult. News channels filled the air with endless discussions. But something interesting was happening outside politics. People everywhere were acting, helping, creating solutions, and showing the refugees that they weren't alone. One woman who lived close to a temporary camp started teaching a small group of refugees how to say simple words in her language. She used gestures, objects, and drawings. In return, the refugees taught her a few words of theirs. She later said, "It felt like we were planting seeds, small seeds of understanding." A group of musicians visited a large camp and began playing soft, calming music. The refugees didn't know the songs, but music didn't need translation. Some refugees closed their eyes, breathing slowly. Others tapped their fingers or hummed softly along. It was one of the first moments where they looked relaxed, even for a few minutes. In another region, farmers brought fresh vegetables from their fields. They didn't give speeches or make announcements. They simply placed baskets of produce on tables and quietly walked back. The refugees approached hesitantly, but when they realized the food was free and safe, their tense expressions slowly softened. But kindness didn't erase all fears. Some people still worried. They questioned the future. They wondered how 6 million newcomers could fit into the rhythm of Earth. They worried about housing, jobs, culture, and resources. These concerns were real, and nobody dismissed them. Even the volunteers who helped every day carried uncertainties in the back of their minds. And yet, the world kept moving forward. In a crowded town square, where a large temporary camp had been set up, a man stood near a fence, watching the refugees quietly. He noticed a group sitting together under a tent, 3 adults and 2 small children. The children were trying to draw shapes in the dirt. The man felt something stir inside him. He walked to a nearby store, bought crayons and paper, and brought them to the camp. He didn't know their language, so he just placed the supplies gently in front of the children. The children looked up, surprised. One of them tested the crayon carefully, drawing a small line on the paper. When the color appeared, the child's eyes widened. Then a smile spread across their face. That simple smile traveled far. The man took a photo not of the child's face, but of the drawing itself, and posted it online. The image reached millions. A simple drawing made by a refugee child on their first day with crayons. People wrote thousands of comments about how hope could exist even in the darkest situations. Even journalists began to cover more positive stories. They showed how rural communities opened their hearts, how refugees began helping volunteers clean up landing areas, how medical teams discovered shared biological traits that made treatment easier than expected, how small bonds formed between humans and refugees through gestures and kindness. As the days passed, the fear that had once dominated the world became smaller. Not gone, but smaller. Replaced by a growing sense of unity. One evening, a translator working in a camp finally understood a phrase repeated by many refugees. It wasn't a request or a warning. It was something soft, almost prayer-like. When? Translated loosely, it meant, "Thank you for letting us breathe." When this phrase reached the public, people felt something powerful. A reminder that the refugees weren't enemies or burdens. They were living beings who had lost everything and were grateful simply to be safe. Part 3 was not about solving every problem. It wasn't about perfect harmony or easy answers. It was about the first steps, the small human acts that slowly built trust, the simple choice to show kindness instead of fear. The world still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, people believed that maybe, just maybe, humanity could rise to the challenge. The next morning brought a strange kind of calm, the kind that feels heavy, as if the air itself knows something important is coming. Everyone in the camp woke up earlier than usual. People spoke in low voices, moving around slowly, trying to act normal, even though no one truly felt normal. The events of the last few days had changed everything, and no one could go back to how things were before. The group had decided the night before that they would finally travel to the large outpost they had heard about. It was supposed to be a safe place, a place where humans were working together, sharing information and preparing real plans instead of just reacting to events. Some people felt excited about going there, imagining bright rooms, organized teams, and clear answers. Others felt worried, afraid that the outpost might be just another rumor that would disappoint them. But everyone knew one thing clearly. Staying here wasn't an option anymore. The one who had spoken most confidently the night before was the same person, now checking the bags near the small transport vehicle. He wasn't the type to talk too much, but when he did speak, people listened. He checked water, food packets, emergency supplies, small tools, and everything else they might need. Every time he picked something up, he made sure it was useful. He didn't want to carry anything extra that might slow them down. The youngest member of the group was pacing nearby, holding a small device that flickered with blue light. The device had been found 2 days earlier, and although no one fully understood what it did, it responded to energy signals from the sky. The group had started calling it the marker, because every time the sky shifted or something unseen passed overhead, the device glowed. No one knew if it was a warning tool or something left behind by accident. But it had helped them once already, so they carried it with care. While everyone prepared, the older woman of the camp walked between people, checking if anyone looked sick or tired. She had a calm nature that comforted people just by being near them. She didn't have medical training, but she understood people when someone needed rest, when someone was pretending to be fine, and when someone was carrying too much inside. She paused next to the quiet boy sitting alone and asked softly if he wanted some warm tea. He nodded without speaking, and she smiled gently, as if that single nod told her everything she needed to know. The sky, which had been clear moments earlier, now held a faint shimmer, like a curtain of pale light being pulled across it. Everyone noticed it at the same time. The group froze, watching the shimmering sky, waiting for something to happen. For a long moment, the light hung in the air, quiet and unmoving. Then slowly, it faded away. Someone whispered, "Do you think they're watching us?" No one answered, but almost everyone thought the same thing. The group knew they weren't alone on this planet, not anymore. There were beings far more advanced, beings who had appeared unexpectedly and left trails of strange lights and signals behind them. The meeting so far hadn't been dangerous, but they had been confusing. No one understood why the visitors came, what they wanted, or why they left clues that felt like half-finished messages. The group didn't know if they were supposed to follow these clues or avoid them. The older woman handed the boy his tea and whispered, "Stay close to the others today. Stick with us." He nodded again, clutching the cup tightly. The person loading the supplies finally stood up straight and said, "We're ready." The entire group gathered near the transport vehicle. It was old, but it worked, and that was enough. It wasn't fast enough to outrun danger, but it was strong enough to handle rough terrain. People climbed aboard one by one, arranging themselves so that everyone had space. It stayed close enough to feel safe. When the engine started, it made its usual shaky sound loud at first, then steady. The vehicle began moving slowly out of the camp. Some people leaned out the windows for one last look. They had lived here for weeks, maybe months, depending on each person's arrival. It wasn't a perfect place, but it had been a shelter. It had been home during uncertain times. As the vehicle moved farther away, the camp grew smaller behind them, until it finally disappeared completely. The journey was long and dusty. The road wasn't even a road, just a worn-out path between rocks and dried plants. Sometimes the ground dipped too suddenly, making everyone bounce in their seats. Other times the vehicle crawled uphill, struggling but refusing to stop. Inside the vehicle, people tried to keep themselves busy. Some talked quietly. Some watched the sky through the windows. Some held on to their bags even though they didn't need to. The boy with the blue glowing device kept checking it every few minutes. Most of the time it stayed dim, but every once in a while it flickered, as if reacting to something far away. No one liked those flickers. But no one asked him to put it away. As hours passed, the group reached a wide flat area where the land stretched endlessly in every direction. Here, the wind blew harder, carrying fine dust that covered everything. The sky was clearer than before, showing long streaks of white light far above. Some streaks moved slowly, others quickly, and though they looked beautiful from a distance, they reminded everyone that this world was changing in ways they still didn't understand. The older woman tapped the driver lightly on the shoulder and pointed ahead. There, far in the distance, something glowed, just a faint dot at first, then slowly becoming brighter. That must be the outpost, someone whispered with relief. People straightened in their seats, trying to get a better look. The idea of real shelter, real answers, and real guidance filled the vehicle with new energy. It wasn't hope exactly, but something close to it. As they approached, they realized the outpost wasn't a small camp like theirs. It was much larger, built with strong walls, metal structures, tall antennas, and lights placed in a careful pattern. The place looked organized, prepared, and guarded. It didn't feel like a rumor anymore. It felt real. When the vehicle stopped at the entrance, 2 guards approached. They were human, wearing simple uniforms. Their faces looked serious, but not unfriendly. They asked basic questions: how many people were traveling, whether anyone needed medical attention, and whether the group had seen anything unusual on the way. The person who had done most of the talking earlier stepped forward and answered calmly. The guards listened carefully, nodding occasionally. The moment he mentioned the blue glowing device, both guards exchanged a quick look, the kind of look that said they knew exactly what he was talking about. "Bring that inside," one of the guards said quietly. "Someone will want to see it." Inside the outpost, everything felt different from the outside world. There was structure here. Lights hummed softly overhead. People moved with purpose. Screens on the walls showed maps, signals, and readings none of them understood. A long table held small tools, strange samples, and pieces of equipment that didn't look human-made. The group was led to a meeting area, a wide, bright room with simple benches. Here, they were asked to sit and wait. The boy held the glowing device in his lap. For the first time that day, it glowed fully, not a flicker, not a dim shine, but a steady blue pulse. Everyone noticed. Even the guards stopped to look at it. "Why is it doing that now?" Someone whispered. Before anyone could answer, a soft humming sound filled the room. Doc, it wasn't machine-like. It wasn't mechanical. It felt almost alive. The lights above them flickered gently, once, twice, then steadied. The screens on the walls shifted from maps to a soft, slowly rotating pattern of white and blue lines. The room fell completely silent. The older woman placed a hand on the boy's shoulder as he stared at the glowing device with wide eyes. It didn't feel dangerous, but it felt important to ignore. Then a door at the far end of the room slid open. A figure stepped inside. Not one of the guards, not a scientist, but someone who clearly held authority here. The group straightened as the person walked forward, studying the glowing device from across the room. "You brought it," the person said, sounding almost relieved. "Good. That means we don't have much time left." The group exchanged confused looks. No one understood what that meant. Not yet. The person stepped closer, lowering their voice. "There's something you all need to know," they said. "Something that affects every human on this planet. And the signal you're carrying, it's not just a warning." The room grew even quieter. "It's an invitation." And at that moment, the glowing device pulsed so brightly that the entire room filled with soft blue light. Everyone knew their journey wasn't ending here. It was only beginning. The following days after arriving at the outpost were filled with a quiet energy, a kind that feels like the world is slowly waking up. The group had learned quickly that this place was different. It wasn't just a shelter. It wasn't just a command center. It was a hub for people who had chosen to act, to help, and to understand, not to judge. Everyone moved with purpose, speaking softly but clearly, and even the simplest task felt meaningful. The first thing the group noticed was how organized everything was. Food, water, blankets, and medical supplies were stacked neatly, ready for anyone who needed them. Areas were separated by activity. Some sections were for meals, some for rest, some for learning new skills, and others for study. Each space had volunteers, quietly helping and guiding people without drawing attention to themselves. Even though there were hundreds of people there, the atmosphere never felt crowded. There was space to breathe, space to think, and space to recover. The refugees were led to a large room filled with tables and chairs. At first, they were hesitant to sit down. Some held their children close. Others looked around nervously, trying to take everything in. But volunteers moved carefully, speaking in soft voices, showing pictures and gestures to make them understand it was safe. Slowly, the refugees began to relax. Some children even began drawing pictures on small sheets of paper, and a few adults helped quietly. As if finding small pieces of normal life again, one of the volunteers had prepared small cards with simple words in the refugees' language, along with pictures to show the meaning. Every time a refugee learned a new word, their eyes brightened. They repeated the words carefully, sounding proud of themselves. The volunteers encouraged them gently, clapping softly when someone got it right. For the first time in weeks, some of the refugees laughed not much, but enough to lift the mood. Laughter traveled quickly, and soon small pockets of happiness appeared in the room. While this was happening, the leaders of the outpost were meeting with other teams to create long-term plans. They weren't just thinking about food and water anymore. They were thinking about how to help refugees learn new skills, how to integrate them into communities, and how to make sure everyone had a voice. There was a strong focus on equality, making sure nobody felt left out, and nobody felt like they had to compete unfairly for resources. The idea was simple but powerful. Give everyone a chance to contribute and grow, and humanity as a whole would become stronger. Outside, the volunteers were preparing more shelters and tents for new arrivals. Each structure was simple, but it offered privacy and warmth. Children's areas were decorated with drawings and small toys, some of which had been brought by local volunteers. A small garden had been started in one corner with seeds from nearby farms. It wasn't large, but it was a start. The volunteers explained to the refugees that they could plant the seeds themselves if they wanted. Some of the older refugees smiled, remembering a home garden they had left behind. Others hesitated, unsure if it was safe, but eventually, a few took the seeds carefully in their hands, planting them in the soft soil. As the days passed, small routines began to form. Morning exercises, simple meals, study sessions, and quiet evenings where people could share stories. Even though language was still a barrier, gestures, drawings, and expressions were enough to communicate. The older woman who had guided the boy with the glowing device became a quiet leader among the refugees. She noticed small changes, the way people were learning, how children were starting to trust again, how adults began helping with daily chores. She smiled quietly, knowing that progress was slow but real. Some refugees began sharing memories of their homes, their families, and the journeys that had brought them here. At first, they spoke only in broken phrases or gestures. But over time, a few volunteers learned enough words to ask basic questions, and they discovered stories of resilience, courage, and hope. The stories were difficult at times, but they were never hopeless. Even when describing the worst moments, the refugees found ways to laugh softly, make jokes, or smile at small victories. Humanity had taught them to survive, but here, they were learning to live again. The younger volunteers started small projects to help the refugees feel engaged. One group began teaching simple crafts, how to weave baskets, fold papers into shapes, and paint small designs. Another group taught basic science experiments using safe materials, showing how water moved through soil or how plants grew from seeds. The refugees were curious and eager. They asked questions, repeated demonstrations, and sometimes tried things on their own. Each attempt, each mistake, was celebrated. The volunteers reminded them that learning was a process, and they were doing well. Meanwhile, adults started volunteering for different tasks. Some helped organize supplies. Others cleaned, cooked, or assisted with language practice. Slowly, a sense of contribution emerged. The refugees no longer felt like passive recipients of care. They were part of a community, helping where they could, learning where they needed, and sharing what they knew. The glowing device, once a source of mystery, became a symbol of unity. Every time it pulsed softly, people felt connected. It reminded them that there were things beyond their understanding, but they didn't need to fear them. They only needed to be open to learning, caring, and working together. Sometimes children pressed their hands against it gently, fascinated by the soft light. Older people watched quietly, remembering that small moments of curiosity could change the way people saw the world. Outside the outpost, the wider world began to notice. News reports shifted from fear to admiration. People watched stories of communities opening their doors, schools helping refugees, and families sharing what little they had. The narrative was changing. Earth was no longer a planet caught in panic. Earth was a planet showing care, courage, and compassion, even under pressure. And the more stories were shared, the more other countries and communities felt inspired to act. It became a ripple effect, one small act of kindness spreading into hundreds more. Some humans even began working with the refugees to rebuild small areas affected by their arrival. Roads were cleared, tents were reinforced, and gardens planted. Refugees learned how to handle tools and materials, teaching one another skills they remembered from home. Slowly, Earth became a shared place, a combination of human experience and refugee resilience. Together, they created a network of trust, support, and hope that grew stronger every day. One evening, a gathering was held outside the main hall. Everyone, humans and refugees, sat in a large circle. Some had blankets over their shoulders, some children held small drawings they had made, and some adults carried simple gifts they wanted to share. A translator spoke slowly, repeating phrases in both languages. The message was simple. We are together. We can help each other. We can grow. The refugees looked around, slowly smiling. Some nodded. Some touched the hands of the volunteers who had helped them. Children laughed softly, playing with sticks or drawings. Adults began sharing stories again. This gathering didn't solve all problems, but it reminded everyone why they were working so hard, the human need to connect, to help, to care. In the following weeks, the outpost became a place where hope could grow. Refugees began teaching skills they had carried from their home worlds, adding value to Earth in small but important ways. Humans learned patience, curiosity, and empathy in ways they never had before. And the children, most of all, began to feel safe. They laughed, played, and learned, growing into a new generation who would know both the fear of displacement and the power of kindness. What started as punishment, what started as an unexpected challenge, slowly turned into something extraordinary. Earth was tested, and humanity responded not with anger or fear, but with care, patience, and courage. The world had chosen kindness. The world had chosen hope. And in the end, the story didn't belong to any one person. It belonged to all of them, the refugees who had survived, the humans who had opened their hearts, the volunteers who had given time, and the children who had reminded everyone what it meant to live fully, even in uncertain times. The last night at the outpost was quiet. A gentle wind moved through the small tents. The glowing device pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. People sat outside, looking at the stars. Some held hands. Some just watched in silence. And everyone felt the same thing, that even in the darkest moments, humanity's light could shine through. Even when punished unfairly, the choice to be kind could change the world. The refugees had found safety. Humans had found courage. And together, they had created a new beginning.